They laughed because they thought they knew what they were looking at. An ID. A face. A name. Nothing more. To them, she was just another person in a long line of faces passing through, forgettable and unimportant. The kind of person you glance at, process, and dismiss without thinking twice. That's the thing about underestimation, it's almost always wrapped in arrogance. People mistake confidence for superiority and silence for weakness. And in that brief, fleeting moment where they scanned her ID and let out that condescending laugh, they revealed far more about themselves than they ever did about her. They saw what they wanted to see. A young woman, probably not from around here. Dressed plainly. Quiet. Eyes that observed more than they expressed. The kind of woman people talk over in meetings, overlook in conversations, and interrupt before she's finished. It wasn't that she didn't carry power. It was that her power wasn't loud, and loud is the only language some people understand. But here's the dangerous thing about assuming someone is powerless: you let your guard down. You expose your weaknesses. You mock, you smirk, and you forget that sometimes the smallest spark is the one that sets everything ablaze. She had been underestimated her entire life. In classrooms where teachers assumed she wasn't ready. In offices where managers spoke of her like she wasn't in the room. In streets where men thought her silence meant compliance. Every time it happened, she remembered. Not with bitterness, but with focus. With discipline. With the clarity that one day they would all see what they failed to recognize. Because what they didn't realize, what they refused to believe, was that people like her are always watching. Always listening. Always preparing. They may move quietly, but it is with intention. They may not challenge you in the moment, but they are always strategizing. Underestimation is not a setback for people like her, it is a shield. It is the luxury of invisibility, the gift of being seen as no threat while quietly building the power to rewrite the rules of the room. When that emblem lit up on the screen, it wasn't just a symbol. It was a mirror. A sharp, glowing reminder of everything they had refused to see. Her silence had never been weakness. Her patience had never been surrender. Her presence, though quiet, had never been passive. What flashed on the screen wasn't just a glitch in the system. It was the moment their illusion shattered. Because in that instant, their laughter, that casual, smug little chuckle, turned into silence. The kind of silence that weighs on the chest. That gnaws at the edges of comfort. That forces people to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. There's a pattern to underestimation. It's predictable. People see surface. They see gender, accent, skin, age, clothes, and then they decide who you are. They measure your worth in stereotypes and label you based on the smallest data. But the truth? The truth lives underneath. And the ones who survive, who endure, who rise, are those who never let the outside noise define the limits of their strength. She didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to argue. The moment her emblem appeared, the work was already done. The years of being overlooked had already paid off. Because she didn't just walk into that room, she arrived. And when power shows up unannounced, unassumed, and fully formed, it terrifies people. Because now they have to ask, what else did we miss? Who else have we laughed at? How many others like her are out there, waiting, watching, preparing? Underestimation is the first mistake. The most common mistake. The most dangerous mistake. It's the moment where those in control loosen their grip, believing they're untouchable. And it's the exact moment someone like her walks in, not to take control, but to remind them that control was never really theirs to begin with. There's a strange comfort in hiding. In blending in keeping your truth tucked safely beneath layers of what the world expects. She knew this comfort well, not because she was afraid of who she was, but because she had learned the cost of showing it too soon. Every part of her identity had been shaped by choices made in silence. Choices made not out of fear, but out of precision. Timing matters. And when the world isn't ready to receive who you truly are, hiding becomes not a weakness, but a strategy. For years, she moved through the world as if walking through fog. People saw outlines, fragments, pieces of the whole. Never the full image. Never the entire story. It was easier that way. Safer. The less they knew, the less they could target. The less they could distort. The less they could try to control. And in a world where identity is often weaponized, twisted into something dangerous or disposable, protecting it becomes an act of rebellion in itself. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It waits. Quietly. Sometimes patiently. Sometimes with urgency pressing against the walls of your silence. There comes a moment, not always loud, not always planned, when the truth demands to be seen. Not just for validation, but because the weight of hiding becomes heavier than the risk of exposure. She didn't expect the emblem to light up like that. Not in front of them. Not like that. But maybe the truth had been waiting for this moment all along. Maybe it had grown tired of playing small, of being diluted into something palatable. Maybe it had been looking for a crack in the mask, a glitch in the system, an unexpected flicker of electricity to say, I'm done waiting. And in that instant, that split second when the screen changed and the room shifted, everything she had worked so carefully to contain stepped forward without asking for permission. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about dominance. It was about alignment. The image on the screen aligned with the truth she had always carried inside her. People think identity is something fixed, something visible at first glance. But the deepest truths are often invisible. They live in gestures, in silence, in how you endure things others couldn't imagine, in the choices you make when no one is watching. The world tries to simplify us, compress us into categories, stereotypes, expectations because simplicity is easier to manage. But the truth about someone's identity is never simple. It's layered, messy, sacred. They scanned her ID and saw letters, numbers, a date of birth. That's what the system showed. But what the system couldn't scan was the lineage behind those numbers. The bloodlines, the legacy, the sacrifice. It couldn't see the years spent carrying a name that didn't quite fit, the code switched for safety, the pieces of heritage whispered from generation to generation. But the emblem saw it. The emblem recognized it. And recognition, when it finally happens, is powerful. Not because it gives you value, you've always had value, but because it strips away the illusions others use to define you. It forces the room to see what's been standing there the whole time. People who never noticed her now couldn't look away. Those who dismissed her before were suddenly scrambling to understand what they missed. But it wasn't about them anymore. It never really had been. Identity is not a costume you put on when it's convenient. It's not something you announce for applause. It's something you live. Quietly. Boldly. With grace. With grit. She had lived hers in fragments, in pieces, under veils. But now, with that emblem glowing, pulsing, undeniable, the full truth had arrived. And it wasn't going back into hiding. The world teaches you to compartmentalize. To be one thing in public, another in private. But at some point, the separation becomes unsustainable. The cracks begin to show. And if you're lucky, or maybe if you're ready, your identity stops waiting for permission. It steps forward. It takes up space. It fills the room without apology. She didn't flinch when the screen lit up. Not because she expected it, but because something inside her had always known this moment would come. The part of her that had stayed quiet, stayed still, stayed watching, it had never been asleep. It had been preparing. And when the truth finally rose to the surface, it didn't need explanation. It simply was. Revelation isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with trumpets or drama. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest, quietest moments. Like a screen flickering to life, like an emblem glowing in unexpected light. And yet, in those seconds, entire power dynamics shift. Eyes widen. Assumptions shatter. Everything that came before is suddenly reevaluated through a new lens. That's the thing about moments of revelation. They don't just reveal truth. They redefine power. Power is often mistaken for volume, for presence, for control over a room. But real power doesn't always walk in shouting. Sometimes it waits. Waits until it's needed. Waits until it can no longer be denied. And when it reveals itself, it doesn't ask for permission. It simply changes the environment. That was exactly what happened when the emblem lit up. The glow wasn't just a symbol. It was a turning point. Before that moment, she was just another person in line. After that moment, she was the person the room couldn't stop staring at. There's a specific energy in the air when perception collides with truth. People freeze. Their confidence falters. Their expressions shift from amusement to uncertainty to fear. Because what they thought was true has been appended. All their quiet superiority, their mocking tones, their dismissive glances suddenly feel exposed. They realize too late that they've miscalculated. Not just a person, but an entire situation. She had felt it before, this strange shift. The pivot of attention, the silent scramble to adjust narratives. It always comes in the wake of revelation. One moment they think they know you. The next, they're questioning everything. And what rattles them isn't just the truth itself, it's the fact that they missed it, that they overlooked it, that while they were so busy being sure of themselves, they were blind to the one presence that could shift the balance. In those moments, the balance of power transfers without a word spoken, without anyone needing to move. It's not about dominance. It's about clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because once the truth is visible, it can't be unseen. It lingers in the atmosphere, alters conversations, rewrites hierarchies. She had spent years preparing for this, though not in the way people expect. Her preparation wasn't in weapons or speeches. It was in discipline, in endurance, in the quiet decision to keep showing up, in knowing who she was even when no one else did. That's what makes revelation so impactful. It's not just that something hidden becomes visible, it's that the person who's always known their own power finally allows the world to see it. And the world, often unprepared, stumbles. You could see it in their eyes when the emblem appeared. Panic. Confusion. That internal scramble for context. Who is she? What does this mean? How did we miss it? But she didn't answer any of those questions. She didn't need to. That's the nature of revelation. When the truth reveals itself with enough force, no explanation is necessary. It speaks for itself. And it leaves no room for denial. Moments like that are rare, but unforgettable. They don't just change how others see you. They change how you move in the world from that point forward. Because once your truth has been revealed, and once that truth has shifted the entire room, there's no going back to smallness. There's no more hiding. There's no pretending you didn't feel the weight of that silence when they realized what they were looking at. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. But the impact was seismic. Quiet power is still power. In fact, it's often more dangerous. Because it catches people off guard. They don't prepare for it. They don't see it coming. But when it arrives, it rewrites everything they thought they knew. And what's left behind in the wake of that shift is a new order, one where she's no longer on the margins, but exactly where she belongs, at the center of the truth. At the center of the power she no longer needs to explain. Respect is often treated like a courtesy, something you offer based on politeness, tradition, or social expectation. She didn't carry herself like someone demanding attention. She walked in like she had nothing to prove, which, in their world, is almost always mistaken for weakness. It's strange how people assign value based on posture, tone, status symbols. As if someone's worth could ever be measured by how loudly they enter a room. As if presence was about taking space instead of holding it. She didn't need to perform authority. She was authority, but they couldn't see it. Not until the emblem glowed. Not until the room went still. Not until their assumptions were met with an image they couldn't interpret fast enough. And in that moment, where silence swallowed laughter, where screens flickered and faces froze, respect appeared. Not because she asked for it. Not because she insisted on it. But because something ancient in them recognized it. There's something primal about recognition. It bypasses language, bypasses ego. You can see it in the way someone's eyes shift, the way their shoulders tense, the way their breath catches just for a second. It's the body remembering what the mind refused to admit, that you are not the one in control anymore. That the person you mocked 5 seconds ago just became the one holding the room in the palm of her hand. Respect enters not with permission but with weight. She had lived long enough to know that asking for respect rarely works. The more you ask, the more people assume they can withhold it. But when it's triggered, when it's earned through truth revealed, there's no way to take it back. It's like a lock snapping open. A door you can't close again. Once people see the real weight of someone's presence, they can't unsee it. The emblem was just a symbol, but symbols carry echoes. That glow wasn't just light, it was memory, lineage, power. And when it flashed across the screen, it pulled something ancient into the room. Something that demanded acknowledgement. Not because of what she looked like, but because of what she was. And what she represented. You could feel it ripple through the space, the sudden shift in how people sat, how they looked at her, how they addressed her. Even their silence had changed, no longer laced with boredom or condescension, but with a strange, nervous awareness. She had become undeniable. Not through argument, not through confrontation, but through revelation. Through the quiet force of something true finally stepping into the light. That's what triggers respect in its most potent form, the collision of visibility and power. And once it happens, people adjust. Quickly. Instinctively. The same ones who once laughed now hesitate to speak. The same ones who dismissed her now choose their words with care. Respect changes tone. It changes behavior. It reshapes the social air. And yet she didn't gloat. She didn't lean into the power shift. Because this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving anything. She didn't need validation from those who couldn't see her before. This moment wasn't for them. It was for her. It was the moment she no longer had to dim, or explain, or soften her truth. The moment when her presence, once ignored, demanded acknowledgement without a single sound. Respect isn't given out like candy. It isn't passed down by default. It's ignited like a flame, like a signal. Comes not when someone wants to give it, but when they realize they have no other choice. And when that switch flips, when the energy in a room bends to meet the truth of someone's identity, everything else begins to rearrange around it. Symbols have always held more than just design. They are not just patterns or marks on a surface. They carry weight. They carry memory. They carry stories that echo through generations and awaken something ancient in us, even if we don't immediately understand it. When the emblem lit up on the screen, it wasn't the glow alone that changed the air in the room, it was what that glow meant. What it represented. What it triggered in the people watching. Symbols don't need explanation when they're real. You don't need a manual to understand the force behind them. Something in you just knows. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to the oldest parts of the human experience: recognition, instinct, awe. That's what happened in that room. One second they were laughing, making snap judgments based on how she looked, how she moved, how quiet she was. The next, they were staring at a screen that refused to let them hold on to their assumptions. The emblem wasn't just a logo. It wasn't some digital fluke or a fancy trick. It was a reminder. A pulse from something buried deep beneath modern arrogance and surface-level judgment. It carried history. It carried consequence. And in that brief moment, it carried her entire presence into focus with the kind of force that makes people rethink everything they thought they knew. The power of a symbol lies not in how it looks, but in how it's felt. That emblem meant something. To her ancestors, to those who came before her and walked silently in places they weren't supposed to be seen. She had grown up learning not just to see the emblem, but to understand it, to feel what it stood for. It represented resilience, identity, legacy. It reminded her of long-forgotten oaths, sacred truths, the weight of promises made in shadows but never broken. And now it glowed beside her name as if to say, you are not alone. You never were. The people in the room had no context for it. That was part of why they froze. Part of why the silence hit so heavy. They didn't know what it meant, but they knew it meant something. You could see it in the way their expressions shifted from amusement to confusion to something close to fear. Because symbols carry consequence, especially when they appear unexpectedly. Especially when they're tied to someone you underestimated. It wasn't just the surprise of it. It was the realization that they had missed something vital. That while they had been focusing on the surface, her face, her ID, her demeanor, they had overlooked the depth beneath it. The symbol didn't appear to impress them. It appeared to correct them. To confront them with a truth they didn't ask for but could no longer ignore. What we wear, what we carry, what we stand for, these things become symbols, too. Over time, her very presence had become one. She had become a living reminder of something people didn't want to deal with, the quiet rise of power that doesn't need to announce itself to be real. The kind of power that moves patiently, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, it changes the atmosphere like lightning in a still sky. There's a reason symbols endure. They outlive leaders. They outlast systems. They cross generations, languages, and borders. And the strongest ones aren't controlled by those in power, they belong to the people who bled for them. The people who earned the right to wear them, to activate them, to become them. She hadn't come to flash anything. She wasn't interested in spectacle. But the moment that emblem activated, it didn't matter what she intended. The moment was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every person who had ever been overlooked, reduced, dismissed. It spoke on behalf of those who never had the chance to speak. And it reminded everyone watching that symbols may be silent, but they are never passive. The glow didn't fade. Not quickly, not quietly. It lingered, burning itself into memory. And in its light, every doubt, every whisper, every smirk from before looked suddenly small. That's what symbols do when they're real. They rewrite the room. They shift the weight of the moment. They carry more than history, they carry consequence, and they always arrive when they're needed most. She was always the quiet one. The girl who stood at the edge of conversations. The woman who walked into rooms and went unnoticed. Not because she didn't have something to say, but because people rarely made space to hear her. They assumed her silence meant uncertainty, that her stillness was a lack of confidence, that her restraint somehow equated to absence. But that was their mistake. What they didn't realize, what they never realize until it's too late, is that the quiet ones are the ones you should watch the most. There's a particular kind of power in those who wait, who listen before they speak, who observe instead of rushing to fill silence with noise. She had spent years watching people underestimate her, misread her, talk over her, make decisions as if she didn't exist. And she let them. Not out of weakness, but out of clarity. She knew what they didn't. That real change, real disruption doesn't always start with a bang. Sometimes it starts with someone like her. Someone who's been paying attention the whole time. Quiet doesn't mean passive. Stillness isn't submission. Her quiet was a choice, a shield, a strategy, a test. She learned early that if you speak too soon, people box you in. They categorize you, define your ceiling, decide your story before you've even told it. But if you wait, if you watch them first, something else happens. You learn how they operate. You learn what matters to them, what they fear, where their blind spots are. And then, when you move, you do it with precision. She had always been gathering information. Not in a manipulative way, but in a deeply strategic one. Every time someone dismissed her, she filed it away. Every door closed in her face was a blueprint. Every room she entered quietly taught her how power moved, how decisions were made, how influence really worked. And so, while others were performing strength, she was building hers silently, from the inside out. The moment that screen lit up, the moment the emblem glowed and the room shifted, wasn't an accident. It was a culmination, a quiet arrival at the exact point where preparation meets revelation. And while everyone else was scrambling to make sense of what they saw, she stood calm, steady, not because she had anticipated this exact scene, but because she had always known something like this would happen. People like her don't wait for permission to be seen. They prepare for the moment when invisibility no longer protects them, and they meet that moment with everything they've carried in silence. That's why the room froze. It wasn't just the emblem, it was her. The way she didn't flinch, the way she didn't explain, the way she looked back at them with the kind of knowing that can only be earned by watching people long enough to understand exactly who they are. That kind of composure can't be faked. It only comes from those who've had to become their own foundation. The quiet ones aren't sleeping. They're storing. They're learning. They're refining. They aren't reacting to every insult or slight or injustice. They're remembering. And one day, when they move, they do so in a way that cannot be ignored. That's the thing about silence. People think it means nothing is happening. But often it means everything is happening just beneath the surface, out of view, beyond the reach of noise and distraction. She didn't have to raise her voice to reclaim the room. She didn't have to list her credentials or explain the history behind the emblem. The truth was already pulsing through the air. And they felt it not just in their heads, but in their bodies. In the way the room seemed smaller now. In the way their certainty evaporated. In the way she stood there, silent and unmoved, while everything around her began to shift. You could tell who understood the weight of that moment and who didn't. The ones who kept glancing back at the screen, hoping it was a mistake. The ones who avoided her gaze. The ones who suddenly remembered every time they dismissed her and now wished they hadn't. Because now they knew. The quiet one wasn't just present, she was pivotal. Some people shake the room when they enter it. But others, like her, shake it by simply being still long enough for the truth to catch up. And when it does, nothing ever returns to the way it was. Because you can ignore someone's voice. You can even ignore their presence. But you cannot ignore the moment when everything you assumed gets rewritten by the one you never thought would be the center of it all.